My name is Anya Petrova. I'm 36 years old. And let me tell you, there's nothing lonelier than sitting at a family table where everyone thinks you're the burden. At Christmas dinner, while the whole room laughed at my expense, my own brother texted me, "Family freeloader. Stay home." Maybe you felt it too, that sting when the people you love make you feel invisible, like you'll never be enough. But what if the sister they dismissed had a secret? What if the one they mocked was quietly holding all the power? This is the story of how one holiday dinner changed everything. The Christmas lights glowed in the polished windows of the Petrova family mansion, casting a festive golden hue over the snow-dusted lawn. Inside the grand dining room was a symphony of old money and calculated perfection. A 12-foot Fraser fir, its branches heavy with crystal ornaments, stood sentinel in the corner. The air was thick with the scent of roasted duck and the low hum of classical music. But for me, sitting alone at the far end of the long mahogany table, the atmosphere was suffocating. I felt like a ghost at my own family's feast. My brother Roman held court at the head of the table, his laughter echoing across the room as he regaled his business partners with a story about a massive land deal. He was a master of performance, all charm and grand gestures. As I watched him, a familiar feeling of invisibility washed over me. Then my phone buzzed. A text message. I didn't even need to look at the name to know who it was from. It was Roman, of course, the king of passive-aggressive communication. The message read, "Family freeloader, stay home." A wave of titters and smug glances rippled through his side of the table as he showed my text to his inner circle. I felt their eyes on me, a mix of pity and disdain. They all bought the narrative hook, line, and sinker. I calmly picked up my phone, my fingers steady, and replied with two simple words, "Interesting." He flashed a triumphant, self-satisfied grin at his audience, convinced he'd won the exchange. Moments later, his phone rang. He glanced at the caller ID, an unknown number, and excused himself with a flick of his wrist. But his face, that confident mask he wore so well, began to drain of color as he listened. His eyes widened and he held up a hand, silencing the table. The conversation had turned from celebratory to an emergency. He placed the phone on speaker and a clipped professional voice filled the room. "Please inform your family that your resort stay has been canceled." The room fell silent. Roman's face was a study in pure shock, his triumphant smile gone in an instant. All eyes, including my parents, turned to me. I met their gazes without flinching. This was their first crack in the carefully constructed facade of our family. My brother Roman was a master of illusions. To the outside world, he was a real estate prodigy, a self-made success, who had turned a small investment firm into a multi-million-dollar empire. He was their golden boy, the favored son who had graduated from a state university and somehow outshone his brilliant but quiet sister, who held a doctorate from MIT. My parents, in their blind pride, never questioned his story. They simply attributed his success to his charisma and his Midas touch, and my lack of a flashy career to my quirky and unconventional nature. The truth was far more insidious. Roman's entire empire was built on my back. I was his silent partner, the ghost in his machine. My life's work, a complex computational finance algorithm I developed in graduate school, was the secret engine of his success. He'd convinced our parents that he was helping me out, throwing me scraps of his wealth and letting me play around with his spreadsheets. They never knew that his entire portfolio, his every successful deal, was predicated on my code. The text he sent me, the family freeloader jibe, was a constant refrain in our toxic family dynamics. It was his way of ensuring I never forgot my place. He needed to keep me small, to keep me dependent, so he could continue to steal my work without a shred of guilt. But I had been preparing for this moment for years. This was a meticulously planned operation that had been building to a crescendo. I had watched him steal my ideas, take credit for my successes, and belittle me in front of our parents, his partners, and his social circle. Each casual insult, each act of theft was a drop of fuel on a fire I had been slowly kindling. I had let him believe he was winning all while I was setting the stage for his utter downfall. The cancellation of his resort stay was just the opening act. It was the first domino in a long, devastating chain. I calmly placed my phone face down on the table, the small sound echoing in the unnatural silence. I looked at Roman, who was now a pale imitation of his former confident self. His mouth was slightly agape, and his eyes, which had always held a cruel spark of superiority, were wide with a mix of confusion and fear. He had no idea what was happening. He had no idea that I, the quiet, eccentric sister he had always looked down on, was the reason his world was about to come crashing down. I felt a surge of cold satisfaction. The man who had called me a freeloader, a dead weight on the family, was about to find out just how heavy my contribution truly was. My father, who had been staring at me with a mixture of confusion and disbelief, finally spoke. "Anya, what is this? What have you done?" I did not answer him directly. I simply stood up, pushing my chair back slowly, the scraping sound on the polished wood floor, a punctuation mark to the end of his perfect Christmas dinner. I looked at my parents, at the faces of Roman's smug friends and partners, and finally at Roman himself. He was frantically scrolling through his phone, no doubt trying to figure out what was happening. But he wouldn't find any answers there. He wouldn't find any of the digital fingerprints I'd left behind. My revenge was like my work, invisible, subtle, and absolutely devastating. I was no longer a ghost at my own family's feast. I was the one who had brought the storm. Without another word, I walked out of the dining room and into the cold night, leaving my family to deal with the disaster I had just created. Anya stepped out of the warmth of the Petrova mansion and into the frigid December air, the cold biting at her exposed skin. Her breath plumed in front of her face as she walked to her car, a sleek Audi Q8. It was a gift from Roman, one of the many expensive tokens he used to reinforce his public narrative of her as a dependent, a pet project he had to generously support. As she slid into the driver's seat, the cold leather momentarily shocking her, she called her former thesis advisor. The voice on the other end was a comfort, a calm port in the storm of her life. "Rachel, I did it. I pulled the trigger." To understand what had just unfolded, you had to rewind to a seemingly ordinary Tuesday 6 months ago, the day her meticulously crafted illusion shattered. She had been at Roman's sprawling Manhattan office, where she went twice a week to help out with his real estate spreadsheets, a cover story for her real work. She was debugging a complex financial model when she stumbled upon a hidden folder on his network. The folder was labeled Project Phoenix. She hesitated for a moment, her pulse quickening, then double-clicked. At first it looked like a routine business plan for a luxury resort in Aspen. But then she saw the appendix. Her eyes froze on the page, scanning line by line. Every formula, every predictive model, every algorithm. Her algorithms. The Aura algorithm. The code she had bled herself dry to create at MIT. The work that had cost her nights of sleep and years of her life was staring back at her, dressed up in Roman's branding. It felt as if the ground had been ripped out from under her. Her throat tightened and her fingers went numb against the keyboard. For a moment she couldn't breathe. Her mind spun back to the long nights in the lab. The notebooks filled with frantic scribbles, the elation of breakthroughs that only she had witnessed. She remembered the pride she had once felt when she believed her work could change the financial world. And now here it was stripped of her name, paraded as Roman's vision. She scrolled faster, her heartbeat hammering in her ears. There were contracts, license agreements, and memos showing how Roman had already sold pieces of her code to boutique investment firms. Millions had exchanged hands. He hadn't just stolen her work, he had built his empire on her silence. And then came the final insult, the trademark filing. Aura. He had claimed it for himself, twisting the name into a grotesque homage to his so-called visionary aura. Anya's breath came in short, controlled bursts. She didn't scream, didn't slam the laptop shut. Instead, a cold calm settled over her. It wasn't the rage that burned hot and consumed everything in its path. This was ice. Sharp, precise, merciless. Her world tilted on its axis. But in that tilt, something else clicked into place. The betrayal didn't crush her. It crystallized her purpose. Roman thought he had erased her, buried her under his charm and lies. But he had just given her the one thing she had been missing: clarity. The next day she flew to Boston and met with Rachel, who was now a renowned financial forensics expert. Rachel, with a single glance at the code, confirmed Anya's worst fears. "This isn't just theft, Anya. This is a complete erasure of your existence. He's not just taking your work, he's stealing your identity, turning your genius into his vision." Rachel helped her navigate the treacherous legal landscape, explaining the nuances of intellectual property law and asset stripping. Together they forged a new plan, a meticulously plotted operation that would become her revenge. It was a game of chess, and Roman, with his overconfidence and ego, had just made his first move. They began by setting up Nemesis Holdings, a web of shell corporations and offshore accounts. Its purpose was to be a fortress for Anya's assets and a silent weapon to destroy Roman's empire. She knew she couldn't fight him head-on with lawsuits. His money and connections would bury her. She had to become a ghost, a silent force that moved in the shadows, using his own greed against him. Anya remembered the hours she'd spent meticulously transferring funds, structuring legal documents, and securing a digital paper trail that only she could follow. It was a grueling process, working late into the night, her mind buzzing with code and legal jargon. She had to build an empire of her own, one that was completely invisible to Roman and his network. She had to become the very thing she was accused of being: a family freeloader, a participant in toxic family dynamics, but on her own terms. The irony was not lost on her. The Christmas dinner text was just the beginning. The sibling rivalry had now entered a new and much more dangerous phase. She'd watched him flaunt his success, the accolades, the lavish lifestyle, all funded by her brilliance. The pain of her family's blindness was a constant ache. But she had a secret, a very expensive secret. And tonight, for the first time, she revealed the tip of the iceberg. As she drove away from the mansion, leaving the suffocating silence of the dining room behind, she felt a quiet sense of triumph. The game was on. She was a woman in finance, a ghost genius, and she was ready to overcome adversity and claim her victory. The silent revenge was finally in motion. The Petrova family's pristine facade began to crack the morning after Christmas. Roman, in a desperate attempt to contain the damage, tried to smooth things over with his investors and partners, but his flimsy excuses about a technical glitch were falling flat. His phone rang constantly with questions and accusations, each call a fresh blow to his carefully cultivated ego. My mother Svetlana called me again, her voice tight with a mix of fury and confusion. "Anya, what was that all about last night? You embarrassed Roman in front of his clients. He's working on a massive deal and you just ruined it." She blamed me for the chaos, refusing to acknowledge Roman's role in their embarrassment. Her voice was the same one I'd heard my entire life, dismissing my accomplishments while magnifying my brothers. "He stole my work, Mom. Every line of code, every design for that resort's software, it was all mine," I replied, my voice as steady as a rock. Svetlana scoffed. "Oh, honey, you know how Roman is. He's a businessman. He just took care of the administrative details so you wouldn't have to." The familiar narrative of his greatness and my incompetence was a bitter pill to swallow. I simply sighed and told her to check her email, then hung up. I had sent her a file containing irrefutable evidence of Roman's fraud and the purchase agreement for the Aspen Resort. It was the first time I had ever directly challenged her blind faith in Roman, and the silence on the other end of the line was deafening. My weapon of choice was no less than the 6.8 resort itself. My revenge wasn't a sudden burst of anger, but a meticulously planned long-term operation. I had secretly purchased the property through Nemesis Holdings, a shell corporation I'd established to protect my assets. I'd outbid Roman without him ever knowing who his competitor was. The sale was a simple, clean transaction, but the legal documents were a work of art. Buried deep within the 300-page purchase agreement was a series of innocuous-sounding clauses. The most crucial of these was a material relationship change provision. It stated that if there were a significant public change in the borrower's family status, such as a divorce or, in Roman's case, a dispute that jeopardized a professional partnership, the loan could be called in immediately. It was a trap, a gilded cage built with his own financial vanity. He had no idea he was marketing a property I already owned. but property was just the beginning. I began to set more traps for Roman's inner circle, particularly our parents and his closest partners. I convinced my father to refinance the Lake Forest mansion using a loan from a company I secretly controlled under Nemesis Holdings. The terms were exceptional, almost too good to be true, and he signed without a second thought, completely unaware of the financial drama and hidden clauses that would link his family's fortune to Roman's actions. I also helped my brother's business partners with their trust funds, weaving them into a complex network of cross-default provisions. If one domino fell, they all would. The entire family freeloader narrative he had built was a shield for a genius, but also a cage for a fool. The phone rang again. It was Roman. I let it ring. He tried again, and again. Finally, a text message came through. "What the hell did you do? My deal fell through." I simply replied with a single word: consequences. He called again, his voice cracking with rage. "You're a sociopath. How did you get the money? How did you even know I was looking at that place?" I didn't answer. I simply smiled to myself. The game of chess had just begun, and the king was in check. Roman's world was built on a foundation of lies and theft, and I was about to show him what it felt like when that foundation was ripped out from under him. The quiet little sister he had so easily dismissed was about to deliver a lesson in financial revenge he would never forget. Roman's lawyers were the first to make a move. A thick official-looking packet arrived at my Brooklyn brownstone via messenger bearing the letterhead of a prestigious Manhattan law firm. The documents inside were a theatrical display of legal threats, accusing me of extortion, theft of trade secrets, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and various other creative interpretations of criminal law. Roman, in his predictable arrogance, still believed he could scare me into submission. The demand letter, filled with inflated dollar figures and aggressive deadlines, was clearly a desperate attempt to regain control. I didn't flinch. I simply forwarded the entire packet to my own legal counsel, a brilliant and ruthless attorney named Catherine Blackwood, whom I had retained through a labyrinth of shell companies a month earlier. Her response was swift and simple, a one-line email stating that all future communication must go through Nemesis Holdings' legal counsel. The message was clear: Roman's intimidation tactics were useless against an opponent he couldn't see. When the legal threats failed, Roman resorted to emotional manipulation, a game we had been playing our entire lives. My phone lit up with his name, followed by a torrent of increasingly desperate texts. He went from threats to pleas, from "You'll pay for this, Anya," to "We're family. We can fix this." I ignored it all. The man who had called me a freeloader and publicly humiliated me didn't deserve a response. His carefully constructed world was crumbling, and I was not going to be the one to catch him. My resolve was firm and my composure was unwavering. I was in a war, a corporate betrayal of the highest order, and Roman was the only one who didn't know it was already over. It was in this state of quiet victory that I received an unexpected call. The caller ID was private, and for a moment I considered ignoring it. But something told me to answer. "My name is Lena," the voice on the other end said, hesitant but firm. "I used to be married to Roman Petrova." The name sent a small ripple of surprise through my mind. Lena and Roman's divorce had been a scandalous affair, widely publicized in the society columns, with Roman painting her as a greedy opportunist who had tried to bankrupt him. But hearing her voice now devoid of the theatricality the media had assigned her, I sensed a kindred spirit. We arranged to meet at a discreet, anonymous cafe in Manhattan, far from the financial district where Roman's network operated. When I saw Lena, she wasn't the hard, calculating woman the tabloids had made her out to be. She wore jeans and a simple sweater. Her face tired, but her eyes held a quiet fire, a look of someone who had seen too much and was ready to fight back. "I'm not here for Roman," she said, cutting straight to the chase. "I'm here because I've been gathering evidence of his fraudulent dealings with my own portfolio for years. I saw what you did at Christmas dinner. It was poetic." She handed me a flash drive. "Everything is on here." The words were simple, but their weight was immense. This wasn't just about my stolen code. This was about a pattern of predatory behavior. The data she'd collected, the meticulous records of insider trading and wire fraud, was the final nail in his coffin. Lena had tracked a different part of the beast, and her findings proved that Roman's greed knew no bounds. He had not only stolen my intellectual property, but he had also systematically ruined Lena's life, just as he was attempting to ruin mine. "I thought perhaps we could work together," Lena said, her voice full of hope. "We could sue him and take him down together." I appreciated the offer, but I knew my revenge had to be a solo mission. "I appreciate this, Lena, but I do not need an alliance," I said, a quiet sense of solidarity washing over me. "I have everything required to ensure Roman faces appropriate consequences." I reached into my purse and handed her a business card. "This is the SEC investigator who has been calling me. He would be very interested in what you have documented." Lena took the card, a look of empowerment crossing her face. She was no longer just a victim. She was a survivor, and she had the means to take her own stand. She nodded once and walked away, her shoulders a little straighter than when she had arrived. I returned to my apartment with a renewed sense of purpose. My financial revenge was no longer just a personal crusade. It was about justice. The financial drama that had consumed our lives was about to become a very public spectacle, and I was the one who was going to pull back the curtain. The silent war was moving forward exactly as I had planned, but with an added unexpected bonus. Roman's own past victims were now his enemies, and they were ready to watch his world burn. I was no longer fighting alone. I was a part of a quiet, powerful movement against a man who thought he was invincible. Roman's last-ditch effort to save his empire began with a theatrical show of force. A formal invitation to an emergency board meeting arrived at my doorstep, a thinly veiled attempt to force my hand. The message was clear. Roman believed he could salvage his reputation by publicly discrediting me. He was still operating under the assumption that I was a minor obstacle, a mere technical glitch he could sweep away with a well-timed performance. I accepted not as an equal but as an executioner walking into a trap of my own design. I arrived at the sleek modern office building in downtown Chicago, the same one where Roman had once made me serve coffee to his clients. This time, the receptionist's eyes widened in a mix of recognition and utter confusion. The once familiar hum of corporate efficiency was replaced by a tense, nervous silence. The conference room door opened and I walked in. 7 board members sat around the polished mahogany table, their faces a mixture of confusion and fear. Roman, a shell of his former self, sat at the head of the table. His tailored suit was wrinkled, his designer stubble now an unkempt beard. He looked like a man who had aged 5 years in as many days. His eyes, once full of a triumphant arrogance, were now hollow and desperate. He looked up at me, a flicker of panic in his gaze, as if seeing a ghost. I ignored the empty chair they had set for me at the far end of the table, a symbolic gesture of my supposed insignificance. I walked straight to the presentation screen and connected my laptop with practiced ease, bypassing Roman's supposed control. The first slide appeared, showing the complete ownership structure of the Aura algorithm. I looked at them, my voice calm and steady. "Gentlemen," I began, noting how they flinched at my formal address. "You called this meeting to discuss your technological crisis. Let me clarify your position. Every line of code that Roman's company depends upon belongs to Nemesis Holdings, which is wholly owned by me." A wave of murmurs rippled through the room. Roman's face, already pale, turned a ghostly white. I clicked to the next slide, revealing the patent filings for my algorithm, all registered under my maiden name, Anya Ivanova. Long before Roman's company even existed. "The patents were filed under my maiden name," I explained, "which is why your due diligence never found them. Roman didn't steal a business plan. He stole the very heart and soul of your company." The room fell into a stunned silence. The board members, who had built their fortunes on the back of Roman's fraudulent claims, were now staring at the irrefutable truth. Their entire empire was a house of cards, built on a foundation of lies and a monumental act of intellectual property theft. Roman finally found his voice. "This is a lie," he spat, his voice trembling with a mix of fury and fear. "She's a freeloader. She's trying to extort us. This is all part of her elaborate financial drama." "No," I replied, my voice calm and unwavering. "I'm not here to extort anyone. I'm here to offer you a choice. I clicked to the next slide, presenting them with two options. Option 1, I stated, is that you recognize me as the founder and majority owner of Roman's company with 70% equity based on the valuation of the intellectual property I created. Roman retains 5%. The board splits the remaining 25%. Option 2 is that I sell everything, the patents, the algorithms, the intellectual property, to a rival firm, Quantum Partners, for pennies on the dollar, leaving you with nothing. The board members, who had spent their lives in the cutthroat world of real estate investment, immediately understood the gravity of the situation. Without my algorithm, their company was just a name on a piece of paper. Their entire portfolio would become worthless, their clients would lose everything, and their reputations would be in tatters. They looked at Roman, who was now a pathetic, pleading figure, and then at me, the quiet, unassuming woman in finance who held their future in her hands. The choice was clear. They had been victims of a corporate betrayal, but they were also complicit in their own downfall. They had trusted the flashy salesman and ignored the quiet genius. "This is not a negotiation," I said, a finality in my voice. "The contracts are waiting. You have 1 hour to decide." I closed my laptop and walked out of the conference room, leaving them to their desperate deliberations. I spent that hour in a coffee shop across the street, watching through the window as messenger after messenger arrived at the building, lawyers and advisors being summoned for emergency consultation. When I returned, the contracts were signed. I was now the majority owner of the company I had built from nothing. The unraveling of Roman's life had just begun, and the revenge was finally complete. The public fallout of Roman's downfall was swift and merciless. It didn't begin with a courtroom or with lawyers shouting over fine print. It began with a headline. The morning I saw it, I was sitting in my small Brooklyn kitchen, coffee cooling beside me, when the notification flashed across my phone. The Wall Street Journal had broken the story wide open: the ghost genius who built and rebuilt Petrova Realty. For a moment, I simply stared at the words, my pulse quickening. A dagger, clean and sharp, driven straight into the image Roman had spent his life polishing. My hands trembled, not from fear but from the strange, dizzying mix of vindication and grief. The truth was finally out, and yet a part of me ached. It should never have taken this long. The exposé was brutal in its precision. Susan Chin, the reporter, had done her work with the same meticulous care I once gave to algorithms. She laid everything bare: the side-by-side comparisons of my early doctoral models from MIT and Roman's glossy presentations, the identical formulas, the unmistakable fingerprints of my mind. She described how year after year my name had vanished from company records, just as Roman brought in his loyal circle of friends, replacing my presence with shadows more pliable than me. And then came the quotes. My old professor, Thomas Morrison, his voice captured in black ink. Anya Ivanova was the sole architect of the algorithm. No one else can claim authorship, not Roman Petrova, not anyone. I pressed the heel of my palm against my mouth, suddenly unsteady. To be seen finally after so many years of erasure, it was both a relief and a wound reopened. While I read, Roman's world crumbled in real time. His phone, once alive with the constant chatter of investors and hangers-on, went dead. Silence. For a man like him, silence was the cruelest punishment. He had thrived on noise, on applause, on laughter, on constant validation. Now the quiet wrapped around him like a shroud. In contrast, my own phone lit up until it buzzed against the table like a living thing. CNBC, Bloomberg, Financial Times. Everyone wanted to hear from me, the quiet genius who had toppled a titan. Each request came with flattery promises of airtime, the lure of vindication on the grandest stage. But I declined them all. I didn't need to shout my victory from the rooftops. The truth was public now. That was enough. Instead, I turned my attention to what mattered: building something that was mine. The first move was strategic. I sold a non-exclusive license to the Aura algorithm to Quantum Partners, a rival firm with a reputation for integrity. The deal was worth $40 million. But it wasn't just about the money. It was a declaration, a message to the industry that the ghost had a name, a face, and more power than Roman ever truly possessed. The funds gave me freedom, but they also gave me clarity. I leased offices on the 32nd floor of a Chicago skyscraper. By some twist of irony, Roman's old firm had occupied floors just above. Each time I stepped out of the elevator, I could almost feel the toxic echo of his presence in the marble and glass. But those ghosts no longer frightened me. They reminded me of what I had overcome. Aura Financials wasn't just a company. It was a mission, a promise to myself that brilliance would never again be stolen or silenced under my watch. Where Roman had built an empire of vanity, I would build one of vision. Where he hoarded power, I would cultivate it. Still in the quiet moments, I let myself reflect. For years, I had been a ghost at the family table, a silent partner in his empire, a shadow mistaken for nothing. Now the word ghost had become my banner. The ghost genius, the one he tried to erase, was the same ghost who had returned to dismantle him. I looked out at the Chicago skyline from my new office, the city lights glimmering like circuits in a living machine. For the first time, the tide had truly turned. I had reclaimed my work. I had reclaimed my name. And I had exposed the man who once convinced the world I was invisible. But my victory wasn't only about toppling him. It was about what came next. About legacy. About building a place where women in finance, brilliant women like me who had been mocked, dismissed, or overlooked, could finally find a home. For years, Roman's empire had thrived on silencing others. Mine would thrive on giving them back their voices. I was no longer a ghost in the machine. I was the machine itself. The call came on a gray Monday morning, the kind where the sky hung low and heavy like the world itself was bracing for bad news. Roman's lawyer spoke with clipped precision. He's requesting a meeting. He wants to make amends. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because I knew exactly what it meant. It wasn't contrition. It was desperation. Roman had lost everything, his wealth, his empire, his reputation. The bank had stripped him of the penthouse he once flaunted. The Lake Forest mansion was in receivership, and the media that once hailed him as a golden boy now spoke his name only as a cautionary tale. I agreed to the meeting, but not on his terms. I chose a small coffee shop tucked away on a forgotten street corner, far from the glittering high-rises where he once held court. No marble lobbies, no glass towers, just chipped paint, mismatched chairs, and the bitter smell of burnt espresso. Neutral ground, stripped of illusion. When he walked in, I barely recognized him. The man who had once strutted into rooms like he owned the air itself now looked like he was drowning in it. His tailored suits had been replaced by a wrinkled blazer that hung loose on his frame. His skin sagged in ways it hadn't months ago, his beard uneven, his eyes bloodshot and hollow. It was as if the years had finally caught up with him all at once. He spotted me in the corner and approached slowly, each step hesitant. When he sat down, his hands shook so badly that the coffee cup rattled against the saucer. For a long moment, he couldn't meet my eyes. This was the same brother who had once humiliated me in front of 40 people at a Christmas dinner. Now he couldn't even look at me. Anya, he rasped, his voice a fragile thread. I know I made a mistake. The words sounded foreign in his mouth, like a language he'd never spoken before. A clumsy attempt at humility. A mistake, I echoed, my tone calm but sharp enough to cut. Roman, you didn't make a mistake. You spent years planning to steal my life's work. You betrayed my trust, our parents' trust, everyone who ever believed in you. You didn't just take my work, you tried to erase me. This wasn't a mistake. It was calculated. He flinched as though the truth itself had struck him. For a flicker of a moment, I thought I saw the old Roman, the one with the easy arrogance, the manipulative smile. But it faded, replaced by the hollow man before me. I can give it all back, he pleaded, his hands gripping the cup like a lifeline. The company, the resort, everything. Just tell me how to make this stop. I shook my head slowly. There was no anger in the gesture, only finality. You can't, Roman. It's already gone. The company is mine. The resort is mine. And your reputation, well, that belongs to you. You earned it. He looked up then, and for the briefest moment the spark of his old defiance flickered in his eyes. His lips curled in a snarl. "This isn't over. My lawyers will destroy you. I'll get it all back." I leaned back in my chair, studying him the way one studies the final embers of a dying fire. "No, Roman. This is the end for you. For me, it's a beginning. You can keep clawing at the ashes if you like, but there's nothing left for you to take." Silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. Around us, the cafe hummed with ordinary life students, typing on laptops, an old man reading a newspaper, a barista calling out names for lattes. The world moved on, indifferent to the fall of Roman Petrova. I rose to my feet, pushing the chair back slowly, deliberately. "You should go," I said softly, "because this is the closest you'll ever get to an ending you can control." For a heartbeat, he just sat there, his chest heaving as though he wanted to spit back one last insult, one last claim to power. But nothing came. His words, his charm, his weapons, they had all abandoned him. He stood abruptly, nearly knocking the table over, and stormed out into the gray morning. His figure shrank in the fogged glass until he was gone, a shell of the man who once thought himself untouchable. I stayed a moment longer, hands wrapped around my coffee cup, breathing in the quiet. A profound peace settled over me, not the fiery rush of victory, but the deeper calm of justice finally served. The financial revenge was complete. I had not only reclaimed what was mine, but I had exposed the man who tried to erase me. Roman's story had ended in ruin, but mine was only beginning. For the first time in years, I felt the weight lift. I was free. I had overcome not just him, but the ghost of myself he had tried so hard to create. And as I stepped out into the cold morning, the city lights blinking awake above me, I knew one truth with absolute clarity: I was no longer his shadow. I was my own light. The 32nd floor of the tower smelled like fresh paint and possibility. Floor-to-ceiling windows stretched across the length of the office, offering a sweeping view of Chicago's skyline. From here, the city didn't look hostile or indifferent the way it used to when I was a ghost in my brother's shadow. Tonight, as the elevators hummed shut behind me, the lights of the city felt like a map of opportunities, millions of tiny sparks reminding me that I wasn't invisible anymore. I had reclaimed my algorithm, my name, and my freedom. But I wasn't naive. A company wasn't built on vindication alone. It needed people. It needed a team as brilliant, wounded, and relentless as I was. That's when I began looking for those who, like me, had been underestimated, overlooked, or erased. The first time I saw Dr. Sarah Okoro was at a modest economics conference in D.C. She stood at the podium, a lone figure in a wrinkled blazer, delivering a presentation that should have been shaking the world of monetary policy. Her model was elegant, predictive, the kind of work that could reshape global trade forecasting. Yet half the audience scrolled through their phones. Afterwards, I approached her notebook in hand like an eager student. "Dr. Okoro, your model on exchange rate volatility, it's extraordinary. Why isn't the Federal Reserve running it?" She gave me a tired smile, the kind of smile that carried years of resignation. "Because they don't see the model," she said. "They see a woman. And women don't get promoted for brilliance. We get told to be patient." Something in me tightened. I knew that feeling too well. I reached into my bag, pulled out a business card with the fresh logo of Aura Financials. "Come work for me," I said simply. "I see your brilliance. I won't ask you to be patient." Her fingers lingered on the card longer than necessary, as if it was fragile, as if it might vanish. When she finally looked back up, there was a flicker in her eyes, a spark I recognized from my own reflection. Jessica Martinez was harder to reach. I found her on LinkedIn at 2 a.m. when the insomnia of building a company from scratch pressed down on me like a weight. Her profile was impressive but incomplete, a patchwork resume that screamed omission. I dug deeper: conference papers, footnotes in obscure journals, whispered acknowledgments buried in other men's publications. She had built risk models so sophisticated they were practically clairvoyant. But every official record credited them to her male supervisor at Goldman. I hesitated before messaging her. What if she ignored me? What if she laughed at the audacity of a woman running her own firm? Finally, I typed, "I know who you are. I know what you built. And I know it was stolen. I'd like to talk. 2 days passed with silence. Then a short reply. Why should I trust you? I answered with the only truth I had. Because I've lived your story, and I refuse to let it happen again to either of us. The phone call that followed lasted 3 hours. At first her voice was clipped defensive, but as I recounted my own battle, the stolen algorithm, the humiliation, the slow reclaiming of my name, I heard her tone change. By the end there was steel in her words. If you're serious, Anya, I'm in. But this time, no one else takes the credit. Amy Patterson didn't need convincing. She just needed to be found. I stumbled across her on an obscure coding forum where she posted under the alias Nightingale. Her code was alive threads of logic that sang with efficiency and elegance. High-frequency trading scripts, risk analysis tools, predictive engines. I messaged her privately asking for a call. Her reply was immediate and blunt. I don't do interviews. My work speaks for itself. I'm not interviewing you, I typed back. I'm offering you freedom. A place where your work will have your name on it. The pause before her reply was longer this time. Then, when do I start? Our first night together in the office didn't look like the glossy tech startups you see in magazines. There were no neon signs, no kombucha taps, no beanbags. Just mismatched chairs, rented desks, and 4 women clutching paper cups of burnt coffee as we stared at the whiteboard. Sarah was sketching out policy impact models, her handwriting looping across the board like flowing water. Jessica interrupted with sharp corrections, tightening assumptions and pushing scenarios further. Amy sat cross-legged on the floor laptop perched on her knees, her screen a blur of cascading code. And me. I stood back for a moment, letting the hum of their voices wash over me. For the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. I felt like the ghost genius had finally found her people. At midnight, Sarah set down her marker, wiped her hands on her jeans, and raised her coffee cup. To the overlooked and underestimated, she said. Jessica and Amy lifted theirs, tired smiles, breaking across their faces. I raised mine too, my throat tight with something dangerously close to joy. The clink of cardboard cups wasn't elegant, but it was perfect. Days turned into weeks, and the office filled with life. Some nights we argued until dawn, voices hoarse and whiteboard covered in furious calculations. Other nights we laughed so hard, the cleaning staff peeked in confused at the sight of 4 women sprawled on the floor amid pizza boxes and spreadsheets. Slowly, Aura Financials began to take shape not as Roman's flashy empire of deceit, but as something quieter, stronger. Our first prototype of the updated Aura algorithm ran one Friday morning. When the results came in projections that matched market outcomes with stunning precision, we all screamed at once, collapsing into a heap of relief and exhilaration. Standing at the window afterwards, I looked down at the city lights. They no longer seemed like indifferent stars mocking me from afar. Tonight they looked like proof that I had survived, that we all had. Aura Financials wasn't just a company. It was a reclamation. For Sarah, it meant finally being seen. For Jessica, it meant owning her brilliance. For Amy, it meant working without a mask. For me, it meant turning betrayal into a foundation strong enough to build an empire. We weren't just overlooked women in finance anymore. We were builders, warriors, visionaries. And the empire we were creating was going to change everything. While my new empire soared, Roman's world was crumbling. The SEC investigation, bolstered by the undeniable evidence provided by Lena and me, had uncovered years of misrepresentation to investors. He was no longer a respected real estate investor, but a pariah, a cautionary tale whispered about in boardrooms and cocktail parties. His partners publicly distanced themselves, claiming they had been deceived about the origins of the technology and his so-called self-made success. The financial ruin spread like a disease, infecting the entire Petrova family. The bank foreclosed on the Lake Forest mansion, a place that was once a symbol of our family's success. The day the foreclosure notice arrived was the day the final domino fell. I received a frantic call from my mother, Svetlana, begging me to come to the house. When I arrived, the scene was one of complete chaos. My father sat in his study, a defeated man staring blankly at the legal papers. Svetlana was in the foyer screaming at Roman, her face a mask of fury and disbelief. "How could you?" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "How could you let this happen? Our home. Your father's legacy." Roman, a shell of his former self, stood there, his eyes hollow with a mix of fear and rage. "It's not my fault," he screamed back. "It's her fault. She did this. She ruined everything." He pointed a trembling finger at me, the quiet, unassuming sister he had always looked down on. "The freeloader did this. She was supposed to be nothing." My two sisters, Sophia and Mila, who had always been a part of Roman's inner circle, stood in the doorway, their faces pale. "Our trust funds are frozen, Roman," Sophia said, her voice trembling. "Yale called. We can't even get our transcripts." Mila, her face stained with tears, turned to Roman, her voice filled with a hurt and anger that was palpable. "We trusted you. You promised us everything. Now we have nothing because of your lies." The intricate web of lies he had spun for years had finally caught up to him, and he was left alone to face the consequences. I walked toward them, my voice calm but unwavering. "I didn't destroy this family, Mom. Roman did. I just showed you the rot that was already there." My mother's face twisted in a mixture of guilt and shame. She finally saw the truth, but it was too late. The toxic family dynamics that had suffocated me for so long were now tearing them apart from the inside, and I was finally free. The downfall of the Petrova dynasty, built on borrowed brilliance and stolen innovation, had crumbled completely. My revenge was not just about destroying Roman alone. It was about exposing the corruption that had festered within my family for years. The business success I was building was a stark contrast to the wreckage he had created. As I watched my family's downfall, I felt a profound sadness, but also a sense of justice. I had finally freed myself from their toxic influence, and in doing so, I had found my own strength and independence. The financial revenge was a brutal but necessary process, a cleansing fire that had burned away the lies and revealed the truth. I had chosen justice over forgiveness, and for the first time in my life, I was at peace. The year after Roman's sentencing was a whirlwind of activity. But with the dust finally settling on his criminal trial, I found myself with a quiet moment to reflect. Roman was in prison, his family trapped in ruin, and my own startup success, Aura Financials, was a beacon of hope for other women in the industry. But despite my victory, I felt a sense of emptiness. The anger and the drive for revenge had been my fuel for so long that I was unsure what to do now that it was gone. The ghost genius had emerged from the shadows, but I had to learn how to live in the light. My first act was to reach out to my mother. Svetlana, who had once been so arrogant, was now humbled and apologetic. She tearfully admitted that she had been blind to Roman's lies and had treated me unfairly. "I'm so sorry, Anya," she said, her voice filled with a regret I had never heard before. "I was so proud of Roman. I never saw what he was doing to you." I listened to her, my heart aching for the years we had lost. I understood that she too had been a victim of Roman's manipulation. I had always believed that she was complicit in my suffering, but now I saw that she was just as much a victim of his charm and charisma as everyone else. I forgave her not just for her sake, but for mine. The toxic family dynamics that had plagued us for so long were finally broken, and in its place, a fragile but genuine connection was being rebuilt. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I was willing to try. My victory was not just about money. It was about empowerment. I wanted to use my newfound wealth and influence to help other women who had been wronged by the system. I decided to establish the Nemesis Foundation, a nod to the shell company that had been my weapon. The foundation's mission was to provide funding, mentorship, and legal support for women in finance and technology whose intellectual contributions had been stolen, erased, or appropriated. It was a way for me to turn my pain into a powerful force for social change. I wasn't just building a company. I was building a legacy of integrity and justice. My old professor from MIT, Thomas Morrison, agreed to serve on the board. He was a man who understood my genius and had always believed in me. With his help, we began to identify brilliant women whose work had been systematically overlooked. Our first grant went to a programmer in Seattle, whose machine learning innovations had been patented under her male supervisor's name. The second went to a team of 3 women whose startup had been destroyed by a hostile takeover that claimed their technology as pre-existing intellectual property. Within 6 months, the foundation was supporting 27 women across the country, each one building something extraordinary from the ruins of what had been taken from them. I was no longer just a successful CEO. I was a leader, a mentor, and a force for good. My business success was no longer just about personal gain. It was about paving the way for the next generation of women. My journey had been a long and arduous one, filled with betrayal, anger, and loss. But I had taken the worst moment of my life and transformed it into the foundation for something extraordinary. I had overcome adversity and found my voice and my power. Roman had thought he was ending my story, but in reality he had just given me the fuel to write a better one. I had won, and I had done it on my own terms. My financial revenge was complete, and I was finally at peace. 6 months after Aura Financial's launch, I attended the Financial Innovation Conference in Chicago. I was no longer a +1 or an administrative assistant. I was a keynote speaker, a powerful force in the industry, and a living testament to what a woman in finance could accomplish. I stood backstage adjusting my microphone, wearing a simple black dress I had chosen myself when I saw him across the crowded convention floor. Roman was manning a booth for Brennan & Associates, a third-tier firm that mostly handled small municipal bonds. His Tom Ford suits had been replaced by off-the-rack polyester that pulled slightly at the shoulders. His Princeton-class ring was still absent, and his hair had started thinning in a way that expensive treatments could no longer hide. He was explaining something to a potential client who looked thoroughly unimpressed, desperately trying to project the authority he once wore so naturally. Our eyes met across the crowded convention floor. For a moment, time seemed to pause. I saw recognition flash across his face, followed immediately by something I never thought I would see from Roman Petrova: shame. He looked away first, turning his back to me as if suddenly fascinated by the display materials behind him. The man who had called me a freeloader in front of 40 people could not face the woman who had rebuilt herself from the ashes of his betrayal. I delivered my keynote to a standing ovation. The audience of 500 industry professionals listened as I explained the next evolution of algorithmic trading innovations that went far beyond what Aura had accomplished. During the Q&A session, someone asked about my journey from MIT to founding Aura Financial. I told the truth simply and without bitterness about how being erased from my own creation had taught me the importance of ownership documentation and never allowing anyone to diminish your contributions. My story of overcoming adversity resonated with everyone in the room. I had gone from being a victim to a victor, and my story was a testament to the power of resilience. After the conference, I used a portion of my earnings from the Quantum Partner sale to create a new foundation. I had chosen its name deliberately, a reminder that justice can come from unexpected places. It was a way to channel my personal pain into a powerful tool for social change committed to the empowerment of women who had been wronged. I was no longer just a ghost genius, but a visible and powerful force in the industry. I had learned that the best revenge wasn't just about reclaiming what was stolen, but about building something so magnificent that their betrayal became merely a footnote in your success story. I had gone from being a victim to a victor, and my story was a testament to the power of overcoming adversity. The year after the conference unfolded like a storm of growth and recognition. Aura Financials, once a bold experiment born out of betrayal and fire, had transformed into a force the industry could no longer ignore. We opened offices in London and Tokyo within months, not as vanity projects, but as essential branches to manage the flood of international clients seeking us out. The Aura algorithm, once hidden and mocked as a hobby, was now whispered about in boardrooms across continents as the future of financial modeling. Our quarterly returns consistently exceeded market expectations. Journalists who had once celebrated Roman as the golden boy now lined up to dissect his downfall and reluctantly to understand how I had risen from the shadows he tried so hard to trap me in. Forbes named Aura Financials one of the top 10 most innovative firms in America. That recognition was flattering, but it was not what kept me awake at night. What kept me awake was the quiet, unshakable realization that I had built something real, something mine. One evening, as twilight settled over Manhattan and the Hudson shimmered like liquid metal, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. I didn't need to guess twice. Roman's persistence had always been his most dangerous weapon, and perhaps his only admirable trait. The text was short, almost pitiful. "You destroyed everything." For a moment, I simply stared at it. There was no venom left in his words, no triumph, no arrogance, only the bitterness of a man whose empire had rotted from within. And in a sense, he was right. I had destroyed everything he built. But what he could never admit even now was that the destruction was only possible because his empire had never truly been his. It had always been mine. I took a photo of the newest Forbes cover, which Aura Financials claimed as a case study in resilience and innovation, and sent it back to him. No words, no explanation, just proof. A mirror. Then I blocked his number, severing the last thread of connection between us. Roman was a ghost now fading into irrelevance. I, the so-called ghost genius, had stepped fully into the light. The next morning I called my mother. She answered on the first ring, as she always did with me now. Her voice carried both the fragility of guilt and the strength of a woman trying to rebuild what she had allowed to shatter. "Anya," she said, breathless, "I've been waiting for your call." I told her about an apartment 2 floors below mine, a place with river views and a small sunlit nook that I imagined she could turn into a library. For a moment she was silent, and I could almost hear her clutching the phone with trembling hands. "I couldn't possibly," she began, but I cut her off gently. "You supported me through the worst, even when you didn't see me clearly. Let me support you now." When she finally agreed, her tears turned into laughter, soft and disbelieving. That sound warmed me more than any accolade ever could. We were not healed, not entirely, but the distance that Roman had carved into our family was beginning to close. Business moved quickly, but in quieter moments I reflected on the irony of it all. Roman had always painted me as the freeloader, the shadow, the dependent. Yet it was in embracing that role, strategically playing the invisible, underestimated sister, that I found the perfect cover to strike. My revenge had begun in silence, but my victory was anything but quiet. Still, revenge was never the true endgame. I realized that standing in my corner office late one night, gazing at the city glittering below. Success, yes. Independence, absolutely. But the best revenge was not simply exposing Roman's lies or watching him fall. It was this building something magnificent and enduring, something that could never be reduced to spite. Aura Financials was no longer just my shield. It was my statement. My reclamation of a life nearly erased. The team I had built, Sarah, Jessica, Amy, and the others who joined us later, had become more than colleagues. We were a chorus of voices long silenced, finally harmonizing without fear. The office buzzed with an energy I had never felt in Roman's sterile empire. Laughter spilled into late-night brainstorming sessions. Victories, no matter how small, were toasted with cheap wine and unfiltered joy. There was no hierarchy of power games. No manufactured glamour, only brilliance shared openly. Sometimes when I caught Sarah standing at the window with her coffee, or Jessica scribbling equations across a whiteboard with the intensity of an artist, I felt a pang of something close to wonder. This was what a company could look like when built not on lies but on trust, not on theft but on vision. And yet shadows lingered. At times when exhaustion crept in, I would remember Roman's face at that Christmas dinner, smug, certain, untouchable. The memory no longer stung, it steadied me. It reminded me how fragile illusions were, how dangerous unchecked arrogance could become. It kept me vigilant. One night, as I closed my laptop and leaned against the glass wall of my office, I allowed myself to breathe in the view. The city pulsed with light and movement, a living reminder that empires rise and fall, but resilience endures. For years, I had been invisible in this very world. Now it was mine to shape. Tomorrow there would be more challenges, clients to win, rivals to outpace, innovations to deliver. But tonight I stood still, letting the peace of arrival sink into my bones. I was no longer chasing vindication. I had claimed it. The best revenge, I realized, wasn't about proving Roman wrong. It was about proving myself right. About building something so extraordinary that his betrayal became nothing more than a footnote in the story of my success. I had started as a ghost in my own life, erased by the person who should have been my brother. But standing there, bathed in the reflection of the city's glow, I understood I was no ghost anymore. I was the author. I was the architect. I was the...
You're just a gold digger, my mother-in-law Patricia sneered, waving my late grandmother's jewelry box in front of me. These beautiful pieces belong to someone who deserves them, my Emily. I sat quietly at her elaborate dining room table, watching as she roughly handled the antique rosewood box that had been in my family for generations. My name is Isabella Martinez, and at 34, I was watching my mother-in-law attempt to steal what she thought was my inheritance to benefit her precious daughter. What she didn't know was that I was perfectly calm for a reason. These will help Emily with the down payment on her dream house. Patricia continued, her voice dripping with satisfaction. After all, she's actually blood family, unlike you. She opened the box, displaying the glittering pieces inside with obvious greed in her eyes. I took a sip of the tea she'd served, hiding my smile behind the cup. Are you sure you want to do this, Patricia? I asked quietly. Those pieces have been in my grandmother's family for generations. Oh please, he scoffed, picking up what appeared to be a stunning diamond necklace. Your grandmother was just a small-town jewelry maker. These are probably cheap costume pieces anyway, but they'll fetch enough for Emily's house deposit. If only she knew, my grandmother hadn't been just a small-town jewelry maker. She'd been one of the most skilled artisans in her field, known for her ability to create perfect replicas of priceless pieces. She'd also been incredibly wise about protecting her real treasures. Besides, Patricia continued, her voice sharp, these should have gone to Emily anyway. You've been married to my son for 5 years, and what have you contributed? No children, just your little teaching job. Emily needs these more than you do. I thought about the real jewelry collection safely stored in a bank vault my grandmother had set up years ago. She taught me well about protecting what mattered. Every piece in that box has a story, I said softly. Are you sure you don't want to hear them before you sell them? Patricia rolled her eyes. Stories don't pay for houses, Isabella. I've already contacted an auction house. They're coming tomorrow to collect everything. She closed the box with a decisive snap. Maybe this will teach you that in this family, blood matters more than marriage. I stood up, smoothing my skirt. You might want to check the box again, Patricia. There's more to it than meets the eye. What are you babbling about? She demanded, but I could see a flicker of uncertainty cross her face. My grandmother always said that true value lies beneath the surface, I replied, heading for the door. You might want to look more carefully before you contact that auction house. Are you threatening me? Patricia's voice rose, her face flushing red. Wait until I tell David about this. He'll finally see what kind of woman he married. I paused at the door, thinking about my husband, who was currently on a business trip. By all means, tell David. In fact, I encourage you to have everything properly appraised before you make any decisions. As I drove home, I couldn't help but smile, remembering the day my grandmother had shown me the truth about her jewelry collection. I was 16, and she called me into her workshop, her eyes twinkling with mischief. Bella, she'd said, holding up 2 identical diamond necklaces. Which one is real? I'd studied them carefully, but couldn't tell the difference. That's when she taught me her most valuable lesson about protecting what matters. Every piece in her collection had a perfect replica, and only she knew which was which. She'd spent years creating them, preparing for exactly this kind of situation. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. Stop trying to scare me with your ridiculous hints. These jewels are being sold tomorrow, and that's final. I didn't reply. Instead, I called Laura, my grandmother's old friend who worked at the auction house Patricia had contacted. It's starting, I told her. She's bringing in the replicas tomorrow. Laura chuckled. Don't worry, honey. I'll make sure everything goes exactly as your grandmother planned. That evening, as I sat in my study looking at photos of my grandmother, I remembered her words. People who take what isn't theirs often learn their lessons the hard way. Patricia was about to learn just how right my grandmother had been. My phone rang again. It was David. Bella, my mother just called me, ranting about you threatening her over some jewelry. What's going on? I took a deep breath. Your mother is trying to sell my grandmother's jewelry collection to help Emily buy a house. She took the box from our house while you were away." There was a long pause. "She did what?" "Bella, I'm so sorry. I'll talk to her, make her return everything." "No," I said firmly. "Let her go through with it. Trust me, David. Sometimes people need to learn lessons for themselves." "What are you planning?" he asked, knowing me well enough to hear the certainty in my voice. "Just wait," I replied. "Tomorrow is going to be very interesting." As I hung up, I walked to my home office and opened my grandmother's old diary. Inside was a detailed inventory of every piece in her collection, both the originals and the replicas. Patricia thought she was selling precious jewelry to help her daughter, but what she didn't know was that my grandmother had designed each replica with a special feature, a kind of signature that would be impossible to miss during a proper appraisal. Tomorrow, Patricia would learn exactly what happened to people who tried to steal from my grandmother's legacy. I smiled, thinking about the secret compartment in the box that Patricia hadn't found yet. The one containing my grandmother's letter explaining exactly what she'd done with the real jewelry collection. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about confrontation. It's about letting people walk right into the traps they set for themselves. The next morning, I arrived at the auction house just as Patricia was strutting through the front doors, the rosewood box clutched triumphantly in her arms. Emily trailed behind her, already dressed like she owned a mansion instead of the small apartment she shared with 3 roommates. Laura met them at the reception desk, her professional demeanor perfect as she welcomed them. I stayed in the background, watching the scene unfold. "These are museum-quality pieces," Patricia announced loudly, setting the box on Laura's desk. "My mother-in-law collected them over many years." The lie rolled smoothly off her tongue, as though she hadn't spent years dismissing my grandmother as a simple craftswoman. Laura opened the box carefully, her trained eyes scanning each piece. I saw the moment she spotted my grandmother's signature marks, the tiny, almost invisible details that distinguished the replicas from the originals. Her expression remained neutral, but I caught the slight twitch of her lips. "Very interesting pieces," Laura murmured, lifting the diamond necklace Patricia had been so excited about. "Let me call our senior appraiser, Mr. Thompson. He specializes in vintage jewelry." Patricia preened, already counting the money in her head. "Emily, darling, soon you'll have your dream house. Won't that be wonderful?" Emily nodded eagerly. "Maybe we can even get that 5-bedroom in the gated community, the one with the pool." I had to hold back a laugh. They were about to learn an expensive lesson about counting chickens before they hatched. Mr. Thompson arrived, his white gloves and magnifying glass at the ready. He began examining each piece methodically, his expression growing more intrigued with each item he inspected. "Fascinating," he said finally, setting down a sapphire bracelet. "These are some of the finest replicas I've ever seen." The word replicas hit Patricia like a physical blow. "What do you mean, replicas?" she demanded, her voice rising. "These are genuine antiques." Mr. Thompson adjusted his glasses. "Oh, they're certainly valuable in their own right. These are masterwork replicas crafted by someone with extraordinary skill. Each piece has a tiny maker's mark. See here." He pointed to a nearly invisible symbol on the necklace. "This is the signature of Elena Martinez, one of the most renowned jewelry replicators of her time." Patricia's face went from red to white in seconds. "No, that's impossible. These are real." "Actually," Laura interjected smoothly, "Elena Martinez was known for creating perfect replicas of famous pieces. Her work is highly valued in certain circles, but not quite in the way you might have hoped." She named a figure that was about 1/10 of what Patricia had clearly been expecting. Emily's dreams of a poolside mansion visibly crumbled. "But Mom, you said. Where are the real pieces?" Patricia whirled to face me, finally noticing my presence. You know about this." I stepped forward, pulling out my grandmother's letter from my bag. "I tried to tell you to check the box more carefully, Patricia. Maybe now you'd like to look at that secret compartment." Laura demonstrated how to press the hidden catch, revealing a small space beneath the jewelry trays. Inside lay a single envelope yellowed with age. Patricia snatched it up, her hands shaking as she read my grandmother's elegant handwriting. "To whoever thinks they can take what isn't theirs. The real collection is exactly where it belongs, safe from those who value gold over family. What you hold are my masterworks, replicas I created to protect my true legacy. Remember, not all that glitters is gold, and not all family is bound by blood. You tricked me, Patricia's voice echoed through the auction house. No, I replied calmly. You tried to steal what wasn't yours, and you didn't even bother to learn its true history. My grandmother spent years creating these replicas because she knew someday someone would try to take advantage of her legacy. Mr. Thompson cleared his throat. I would point out that these replicas are still quite valuable to collectors. Elena Martinez's work is highly sought after in certain circles. But Patricia wasn't listening. She was too busy fumbling with her phone, probably trying to reach David. I'd already texted him the whole story, including photos of the letter and his mother's attempt to sell my inheritance. Emily slumped in her chair, her dreams of instant wealth evaporating. Mom, what are we going to do about the house? I already told everyone. Perhaps, I suggested quietly, this is a good time to learn about earning things for yourself, instead of taking them from others. Patricia grabbed the box, her movements jerky with rage. This isn't over, she threatened, heading for the door. David will hear all about how you humiliated us. I watched them leave, feeling oddly peaceful. Laura approached me, holding back a smile. Your grandmother would have loved this, she said. She always said the best lessons come from our own mistakes. She also said that true value isn't about what something costs. I replied, thinking of the real jewelry collection still safely stored away. It's about what it teaches us. As I headed home, I thought about how my grandmother's wisdom had extended far beyond her craft. She'd known that someday someone would try to take advantage of her legacy. Instead of just locking everything away, she created this elaborate lesson, turning her skill into both protection and education. My phone buzzed with a text from David. Just talked to Mom. Coming home early. We need to have a family meeting. I smiled, knowing that this was just the beginning of some much-needed changes in our family dynamic. Patricia had learned an expensive lesson about greed and assumptions. Now it was time to see if she'd learned anything about the true meaning of family. David came home the next day, his face etched with a mix of exhaustion and determination. We sat in our living room as I showed him everything. My grandmother's letter, photos of the real jewelry collection, and most importantly, the security camera footage of his mother taking a box from our house while we were away. I knew she could be difficult, he said, running a hand through his hair. But this, stealing from our house, trying to sell your inheritance, I never thought she'd go this far. It's been building for years, I replied softly. The snide comments about my family, the constant favoritism toward Emily, the way she's tried to undermine our marriage. This was just her biggest move yet. Before David could respond, our doorbell rang. Patricia stood there, Emily trailing behind her like a chastened shadow. Gone was the triumphant smirk she'd worn yesterday. Now she looked like someone who'd swallowed something bitter. Well, she demanded, pushing past us into the living room. Are you happy now, Isabella? You've humiliated us in front of everyone. David stepped forward, his voice firm. No, Mom, you humiliated yourself. You broke into our house and tried to steal from my wife. Steal? Patricia's voice rose. I was trying to help your sister. Family helps family. Yes, I interjected calmly. Family does help family. But you've never seen me as family, have you, Patricia? The room fell silent. Emily shifted uncomfortably on her feet, looking anywhere but at me. I have something to show you, I said, opening my laptop. The video played clearly, Patricia entering our house with her spare key, which was meant for emergencies only, heading straight for my study where the jewelry box was kept. You spied on me, Patricia gasped. No, David answered for me. She protected her home, like any sensible person would. I opened another file, photos of the real jewelry collection, each piece gleaming with authentic beauty. These are the originals, I explained. Safe where my grandmother put them years ago. She created the replicas not just to protect her work, but to teach a lesson about value and trust. Patricia sank onto our couch, her bravado finally cracking. All this time, you knew? Of course I knew. My grandmother taught me more than just about jewelry. She taught me about protecting what matters, about watching and waiting, about letting people reveal their true characters through their own actions. Emily spoke up for the first time, her voice small. The house I wanted. I told everyone I was getting it. Maybe, I suggested, it's time to think about earning things for yourself. My grandmother built her collection piece by piece. She taught me that anything worth having is worth working for. David placed a hand on my shoulder. Mom, you need to return the spare key. And we need to set some serious boundaries going forward. Patricia clutched her handbag, looking trapped. But we're family. Yes, I agreed. We are. And families should respect each other, support each other, not steal and scheme against each other. My grandmother's replicas weren't just copies. They were a test. One you failed spectacularly. What happens now? Emily asked, finally meeting my eyes. I pulled out an envelope. Inside is information about a first-time homebuyers program, real estate courses, financial planning resources. If you're serious about wanting a house, here's how you can work toward it legitimately. Emily took the envelope, her hands trembling slightly. For the first time, I saw a glimmer of understanding in her eyes. Patricia stood abruptly. This isn't what I came for. I came for an apology. No, David said firmly. You came hoping to bully us into giving you what you wanted. That's not happening anymore. Things are going to change. As they left, Patricia's shoulders slumped in defeat. I thought about my grandmother's words. Sometimes the most valuable things we own are the lessons we learn. A week later, Emily called me, her voice hesitant. I signed up for one of those real estate courses, and I wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. It wasn't a complete resolution, but it was a start. Patricia still avoided family gatherings, nursing her wounded pride, but her power over our lives was broken. David and I were stronger for having faced this together, and I knew my grandmother would have been proud. The jewelry box sits in my study now, filled with the replicas, a reminder that true value isn't always about what something costs, but what it teaches us about ourselves and others. Sometimes the most precious things we own are the wisdom to wait, the strength to stand firm, and the courage to let truth reveal itself in its own time. My grandmother's real legacy wasn't just in the genuine pieces she created, but in the lessons she left behind. Lessons about patience, protection, and the true meaning of family. As I look at the box now, I smile, knowing that its greatest value was never in the jewelry it contained, but in the truth it revealed.